They thought they knew the ocean, until it turned violent. From a 23-foot great white ambushing a spearfisher to a bull shark striking during a heroic rescue, these real-life encounters push survival to the edge. In this video, you'll watch 6 terrifying shark attacks where adrenaline, instinct, and raw fear collide beneath the waves. What happens when humans enter a world where they're no longer at the top? The water off the southern coast of Madagascar was calm, warm, and clear, nearly perfect for freediving. 31-year-old Luca Moretti had been diving for over a decade. Born in Naples and raised near the sea, the ocean had always been home. He trained as a spearfisher and freediver with precision, conditioning his lungs and body to hunt silently beneath the waves. That morning, he had ventured out with 2 close friends, Marcus and Gibril, both experienced divers like him. Their small boat drifted above a reef shelf known for grouper and wahoo, its hull barely rocking in the gentle rhythm of the Indian Ocean. Luca wore a sleek wetsuit, his long fins glinting beneath the sunlit surface, a carbon fiber spear in his hand, and a dive knife strapped tightly to his leg. It was a routine setup. Below, schools of fish moved in silver clouds, flickering in and out of coral crevices. Luca dove down again and again, holding his breath with practiced calm, his body cutting through the blue with purpose. At 30 meters down, the world was silent except for the faint sound of his heartbeat in his ears. He sighted a decent-sized wahoo and took the shot cleanly. As the fish struggled on the spear, Luca turned toward the surface, kicking steadily upward. He didn't notice the growing void below him and the subtle change in pressure as something immense rose silently from the depths. Marcus saw it first. He was floating just a few meters from the boat, mask fogged slightly from exhaling. A dark shape emerged beneath Luca, long and pale, with the unmistakable width of something massive. For a second he froze, unsure if it was real. Then it came into full view. A great white, easily over 20 feet long, rising fast with terrifying intent. Luca breached the surface, tossed the fish into the boat, and took one quick breath. He turned toward Marcus and Gibril. But before anyone could react, the shark surged up, breaching halfway in a violent burst of water. Its jaws missed Luca by inches. He saw it clearly now, the size, the scars, and the black, unblinking eyes. Instinct kicked in. He twisted underwater, unsheathing his knife in a single motion. The shark turned sharply, faster than seemed possible for something of that size, and came back with crushing speed. Luca met it head-on, diving deep and thrusting his knife across its snout. The blade scraped across rough skin, leaving a shallow gash. The shark jerked its head sideways, knocking Luca sideways with the sheer force of its mass. The water around him vibrated with its motion. His friends were yelling above, but their voices vanished beneath the surface noise. Luca twisted to track it, but it vanished into the blue. For a second, there was only silence and the burn in his chest. Then it came back. From his right side this time, jaws wide, torpedoing through the water like a missile. It struck hard. The jaws clamped onto his torso just below the ribs. The pressure was instant and brutal, more crushing than cutting. He felt his ribs crack. Air burst from his lungs and the sharp edge of agony searing through him. The knife slashed wildly as he stabbed into thick skin and muscle again and again. The shark thrashed, dragging him sideways and down, spiraling into deeper water with unstoppable momentum. He stabbed harder, his hand slick with his own blood. One of the strikes landed deeper, causing the shark to shudder briefly. It let go for a second, then lunged again. Luca tried to swing, but his grip faltered. The knife slipped free and spun away into the dark water. Panic filled the space where adrenaline had been. He kicked weakly, his vision narrowing, and his blood clouding the water in a thick red plume. Marcus and Gibril were in the water by then, watching helplessly from 10 meters away. They had fins and spear guns, but nothing that could stop something that size. They swam toward Luca, but the shark moved faster than thought, spinning once, then vanishing downward with a final flick of its tail, carrying Luca with it as it disappeared into the depths. The water calmed slowly. The red cloud lingered, drifting like smoke through the blue. Only Luca's mask and one fin floated to the surface. Gibril reached them first, searching the depths with wide, frantic eyes. Marcus dove repeatedly, looking for a sign of him. There was nothing but the broken spear shaft drifting slowly to the bottom. They radioed for help. The Coast Guard arrived an hour later, followed by local divers and marine authorities. A wide area was searched, and by midday, a patrol boat located Luca's body tangled in a rocky crevice, deeper than expected, the current having dragged him far. He had died from massive blood loss and internal injuries, the shark's bite having torn through his lower torso. The rescue team recovered what remained of his gear, including the empty knife sheath still strapped to his leg. Back on shore, the diving community reeled from the loss. Luca was known for his skill and care, his love for the ocean, and his measured approach to dangerous waters. That a man so experienced, armed with one of the best blades in the business, could be overwhelmed so quickly by one predator, stunned everyone. Experts said the shark likely mistook the speared fish for prey, its instincts triggered by blood in the water and movement on the surface. But theories meant little. The reality was that no one could have done more than Luca did, and it still wasn't enough. His funeral was held 3 days later, near the same shoreline where he had grown up swimming and diving. His friends, family, and fellow divers gathered to remember him, not only for how he died, but for how he lived, brave, calm, and unshaken even in the face of something monstrous. In the end, his story became a grim lesson whispered around the global diving community. A chilling reminder that in the deep blue, even the sharpest knife and the strongest will can vanish in seconds against a force no human was ever meant to fight. Off the Florida Keys, beneath gray skies and over restless waves, a Coast Guard team prepared for a standard inspection near a grounded freighter that had run aground on a shallow reef. The steel hull of the vessel rested at an awkward tilt, partly submerged and listing heavily, its lower deck scraping the coral shelf below. For the divers, it was supposed to be a routine task: inspect structural damage, check for leaks, and document any potential environmental hazards. Petty Officer Daniel Reyes, 28 years old and in his 5th year as a Coast Guard rescue swimmer and diver, led the operation. Daniel was known among his unit for his composure and physical strength. A former college swimmer, he had joined the Coast Guard not just to serve, but to challenge himself in the most unpredictable waters. He had trained hard, endured brutal selection tests, and spent countless hours mastering dive recovery and underwater navigation. By now, these inspection dives had become almost mechanical. He had done dozens, each one blending into the next. On that late morning, conditions were poor. Visibility was barely 4 meters, and the current pushed harder than expected. Still, protocol demanded a complete underwater inspection of the wreck's keel and nearby reef. With full gear strapped down, Daniel dropped into the murky water alongside 2 teammates. The world around them turned dim and shifting, with beams of sunlight slicing through the gloom in flickering shafts. They moved as a unit, communicating with hand signals and gestures. The wreck loomed ahead, its hull scoured by the current, algae already claiming its flanks. Daniel checked the lower stern and made notes with his underwater slate, adjusting his buoyancy and watching for sharp metal. His team spread out slightly, circling the midsection of the hull. The only sounds were the hum of the current and the faint metallic creaks of the shifting wreck. None of them saw it approach. From behind the broken shadow of the freighter, a tiger shark emerged without warning. Nearly 12 feet long, it glided forward in silence, its movement smooth and steady. It had been drawn by vibrations, the smell of rust, and the subtle panic of distant fish disturbed by the divers. It moved like a shadow behind the stern, then angled downward, zeroing in on Daniel from above and behind. In a split second, it lunged. Daniel felt a sudden pressure and pain explode through his right leg as the shark's jaws clamped onto him just below the knee. The force knocked him sideways. The bite was deep and crushing, a twisting power that bent his ankle unnaturally and shredded muscle with a single wrenching motion. The water erupted in a cloud of red and white bubbles. His mask flooded slightly from the jolt and his slate spun away into the darkness. His dive partner, Chief Petty Officer Langston, was only a few meters away. He turned in time to see Daniel's legs disappear into the thrashing bulk of the shark. Reacting on instinct, Langston kicked toward them and raised the fiberglass utility pole used for probing the wreck. With both hands, he drove the pole forward into the shark's side, striking it hard just above the gills. The shark twisted, releasing Daniel for a moment. Blood poured from the mangled leg. Daniel, dazed but alive, kicked violently with his left foot, twisting away and activating his emergency ascent system. Compressed air inflated his vest. He began rising through the cloudy water, every heartbeat pounding in his ears, every second a stretch of agony as pain shot through his leg with each movement. Langston stayed below, watching for a second strike, his own hand gripping a dive blade just in case. But the shark circled once and then vanished back into the gloom, its interest fading now that the prey had escaped. Langston followed Daniel upward, his heart racing and vision darting through the murky haze. On the surface, the rescue boat was already positioning close to the diver's bubbles. The team aboard spotted the emergency marker and pulled Daniel out quickly. As soon as they saw his leg, their training kicked in. A tourniquet was applied above the wound. Blood soaked the floor of the vessel as Daniel gritted his teeth against the pain, drifting in and out of consciousness. Back at the dock, paramedics rushed him to the trauma unit in Key West. The surgeons worked for hours, stabilizing him and trying to save what they could. The shark's bite had shattered bone and severed most of the tendons in the lower leg. His ankle was pulverized. Though they managed to stop the bleeding and avoid amputation, the damage was severe, and recovery would be long and uncertain. The Coast Guard launched a full incident report, documenting the attack and notifying marine authorities. Experts suggested that the murky water, coupled with vibrations near the wreck and possibly fish remains stuck in the freighter's bilge, could have triggered the shark's aggression. But to Daniel and his team, the reason didn't matter as much as the raw truth. A predator had come out of nowhere in what should have been a controlled situation, and nearly ended a life in seconds. Daniel spent weeks in recovery, undergoing surgeries and physical therapy. Walking again would be possible, but diving might never be. His team visited often, shaken by what had happened, each of them silently aware that it could have been any one of them down there. The mental weight of the attack settled heavily over the unit. They had all trained for danger, but facing something so sudden, so brutal, was something no drill could replicate. The wreck was later removed piece by piece, and stricter inspection protocols were put into place for murky water dives in areas known for sharks. But the image remained, a flash of movement, the jolt of impact, and the spray of blood vanishing into the current. Daniel's gear, torn and stained, was boxed and archived. His dive knife, never drawn during the chaos, remained sheathed the whole time. It became a quiet symbol of how fast everything had happened, how little time there had been to act. He survived, but barely. And every scar told the story of a moment when a 12-foot tiger shark reminded even the most disciplined team that in the ocean, control is always an illusion. Rachel Kim had always craved the solitude of open water. The 35-year-old, born in Cape Town to a family of seafarers, was an experienced sailor with over a decade of voyages across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. She grew up surrounded by stories of the sea's power and beauty. Her sailing philosophy blended caution with freedom. She prepared meticulously but relished the isolation that solo sailing offered. In June 2005, she set out on a multi-day solo sail along the coast near False Bay, one of South Africa's most striking and shark-populated marine regions. The morning she departed, conditions were steady. Cool winds, low swells, and a clear forecast. She checked her gear, secured every latch, and reviewed man-overboard protocols she hoped she'd never need. Her vessel, a 36-foot sloop named Blue Ember, cut through the waves with practiced grace. Rachel logged her position, brewed coffee in the small galley, and smiled at the horizon, unaware that within hours, everything would collapse into chaos. By late afternoon, the weather shifted. Swells began to rise, wind patterns grew unpredictable, and small whitecaps danced erratically across the surface. A rogue wave struck the bow with a sudden slap, throwing sea spray high over the deck. Rachel adjusted her course slightly, clipped her harness in, and moved aft to secure a loose halyard. But another wave rose faster and higher, striking broadside. The force knocked her sideways. Her body slammed against the lifeline and the clip failed. With no time to react, she was pitched overboard. She hit the water hard, disoriented and panicked. Her head broke the surface just long enough for a gasp of air. The boat drifted rapidly away, sails full, as the current pulled her in the opposite direction. Rachel kicked hard, trying to stay afloat in the cold water, her soaked jacket dragging her down. Blue Ember continued forward, autopilot engaged, unaware that the sailor it carried was no longer aboard. She screamed for help, but the wind scattered the sound. Waves lifted and dropped her like driftwood. Farther from the boat now, she spotted a fishing trawler on the horizon, but too far to hear or see her. Panic gave way to survival instinct. She tried to conserve energy, keeping her head up and treading water. But then, below the surface, something moved. A dark shadow approached from behind, massive and fast. A great white shark, likely drawn by her flailing limbs and the vibrations of distress, closed in. She felt a jolt of force against her leg before pain erupted through her thigh. The shark had clamped down, its serrated teeth driving deep into muscle and tendon. Her body was yanked sideways, pulled violently beneath the surface. Water rushed past her face as she struggled against the pressure. The shark shook its head once, tearing flesh and releasing her. She surfaced, gasping, blood clouding the waves around her. Her right leg burned, nearly useless. Tendons likely severed. She flailed with her arms, adrenaline surging, but another strike came almost instantly. This time the shark grabbed lower, around the calf, and dragged her down again. A crew on a distant fishing boat witnessed the entire attack from several hundred meters away. The choppy water and distance made it impossible to intervene. No lifeboat or rescue craft was fast enough, and the rough seas prevented them from closing the gap safely. They immediately radioed for emergency assistance, reporting the location and the situation, but they could do nothing more than watch and wait helplessly as Rachel struggled in the water, torn by the shark's powerful jaws. And then it was over. Rachel floated to the surface, barely conscious, legs shredded and blood pouring into the water in thick clouds. She struggled to keep her head above water, but her strength was fading fast. Her breaths came ragged and shallow. She sank once, resurfaced, then sank again. The blood loss, cold, and exhaustion overwhelmed her. Her vision narrowed, the pain in her leg fading into numbness. Her arms stopped moving. By the time rescue boats arrived, alerted by the fisherman's call, Rachel was unconscious, face down, floating amid the expanding slick of blood. The crew pulled her aboard and tried to resuscitate her, but it was too late. She had drowned within minutes of the second attack. Paramedics arrived by helicopter, but the prognosis was final. Rachel Kim had died in the same waters she had navigated so confidently all her life. The incident sent shockwaves through South Africa's sailing and marine communities. Rachel had been widely respected for her preparedness and caution, and if it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. Authorities reviewed her GPS data, the condition of her safety gear, and the timeline of the attack. Experts concluded she was likely bitten within 10 minutes of going overboard and drowned shortly after, due to massive blood loss and exhaustion. Marine biologists confirmed the species as a great white, possibly a mature adult measuring between 14 and 16 feet. The waters around False Bay were known territory for these predators, especially during times of high seal activity. It was believed the shark mistook her for a struggling prey animal, responding to movement and blood in the water rather than deliberately hunting a human. In the weeks that followed, Rachel's story made headlines around the world. Her death became a symbol of the unpredictable danger solo sailors face, especially in regions where apex predators patrol the deep. New campaigns pushed for better man-overboard recovery systems for solo vessels, including improved harnesses, automatic location beacons, and mandatory onboard alarms. Conservationists reminded the public that sharks act on instinct, not malice. But few could erase the haunting image of Rachel's final moments from their minds. She was buried at sea in a private ceremony attended by family, friends, and fellow sailors who knew the risks of the ocean and still chose to chase the horizon. They mourned her, but they also spoke of her strength and of how she had lived by the wind and died not in fear but in fight. In the end, her tragedy served as a bitter warning. Even for the strongest, the sea holds dangers no human can fully predict. And sometimes the dark shape below the surface comes without warning, swift and final. Andre Dupree had fished the bayous of southern Louisiana since he was old enough to cast a line. At 43, he was a quiet man, known in his small community for his work ethic, steady hands, and deep respect for the unpredictable swamps he called home. His days started at dawn and ended long after the sun dipped beneath the tangled trees. That morning, he had planned a short trip to check crab traps before the rain rolled in. What unfolded instead would test every instinct he had, and nearly cost him his life. The docks along the Atchafalaya Basin were old, warped from sun and time, built more from function than safety. Local families often came here to fish, picnic, or let their children run along the boards. As Andre tied his flat-bottomed skiff to a post, he noticed a woman shouting and pointing toward the water near the opposite bank. He turned just in time to see a small child, no older than 3, flailing in the water beneath the dock, tiny arms splashing wildly. Without hesitation, Andre dropped his gear and charged through the knee-deep water. His boots filled quickly, but he didn't slow down. The toddler's head slipped beneath the surface once, then bobbed up again, mouth wide, eyes filled with panic. The current was weak but steady, pushing the child slowly away from the dock. Andre powered forward, arms pumping through the water, eyes locked on the small figure. But as he reached waist depth, something shifted beneath him. The muddy water stirred unnaturally. He felt it a fraction of a second before it happened. A jolt of movement through the murky current, a sudden pressure against his leg, and then searing pain. The bull shark struck with terrifying force. Its powerful jaws clamped onto Andre's upper thigh, and the pain exploded through him like fire. He staggered, the force nearly pulling him off his feet. The water erupted around him in froth and blood. The shark twisted once, wrenching flesh and muscle, then released and circled again. But Andre didn't fall. Gritting his teeth, he forced his body forward, dragging his wounded leg through the water. Blood poured freely, painting a crimson trail behind him, but his focus never wavered. The toddler was within reach now, barely above water, arms still moving in panicked bursts. Andre lunged forward and grabbed the child, wrapping one arm around the small torso and turning back toward shore. The shark returned, emboldened by blood and movement, darting just behind his legs as he moved. But Andre kicked hard, churning the water in a desperate attempt to confuse or deter the predator. Every movement sent fresh agony through his leg. The shredded muscle barely responded, but he kept going, pulling himself and the child forward one step at a time. The water grew shallower, and the current tugged less. He fell twice, catching himself on one elbow and shielding the child with his body each time. The shark disappeared for a moment, the surface calm but ominous behind them. Andre could barely feel his leg now. His foot dragged uselessly through the mud, and his skin had gone pale beneath the blood. Finally, his knees hit the bank, and hands reached down from onlookers to pull the child from his arms. Andre collapsed fully onto the muddy slope, vision narrowing as the adrenaline faded, and the full weight of blood loss hit him. People shouted around him. Someone tied a belt around his upper thigh, and the buzzing sound of a distant ambulance filtered in through the ringing in his ears. He drifted in and out as paramedics loaded him into the vehicle. He remembered flashes, the blue of the sky, the tight grip of someone's hand, and the rhythm of the road beneath the wheels. When he woke in the hospital, days had passed. His leg had been saved, but not without damage. Surgeons had pieced together what they could. He would walk again, but never without pain. The child survived without injury. Her family visited him as soon as he was stable enough to speak, though he barely remembered the moment. News spread quickly. Local stations picked up the story first, then national outlets. Photos of the muddy dock and Andre's torn jeans circulated alongside headlines about heroism and instinct. Experts later confirmed the shark was likely a juvenile bull, around 7 feet long, drawn in by the flailing movements and splashing water. Bull sharks were known for thriving in shallow, brackish water like the bayous, and they could strike unpredictably when provoked or startled. Still, attacks in those waters were rare, especially on humans. The community rallied around Andre. A fundraiser was held to help cover his medical costs. The town renamed the dock after him, and children were taught not just how to swim, but how to respect the creatures beneath the surface. Andre, once quiet and private, found himself hailed as a hero, though he never called himself one. In truth, he replayed the attack over and over in his head, not as a moment of glory, but as a blur of instinct and fear. He hadn't acted out of courage, not consciously, only out of the deep, immovable drive to save a child from the dark, churning unknown. That something beneath the water had tried to stop him didn't change what had needed to be done. Even months later, he could feel the pressure of the shark's bite if he closed his eyes too long. The water near the docks never looked the same. It seemed deeper now, darker and heavier. But when asked if he regretted diving in, he always said no. The scar that ran down his thigh wasn't a badge. It was a reminder that in places where nature still ruled, humans didn't always get to choose the terms. But sometimes in the split second between danger and action, instinct could overpower fear, even in the jaws of a predator. Elena Rossi had dedicated her life to the deep. At 38, the Italian marine biologist had spent more hours underwater than most sailors spent above it. She had explored coral reefs in the Pacific, mapped currents in the Indian Ocean, and now, off the coast of the Azores, she was leading a small research expedition into open water predator zones. The team's goal was to track pelagic species in deep water, primarily blue sharks and makos, which thrived in the warm Atlantic currents that swept around the volcanic islands. That morning, the ocean was calm. The sky stretched cloudless above the support vessel, and the water below shimmered like polished glass. Elena prepared for her solo dive with a careful routine. She checked her tanks, calibrated the camera rig strapped to her chest, and secured her dive knife tightly to her right leg. Though the region had seen occasional encounters with large predators, she trusted her experience and the protocol in place. A dive cage wasn't practical at the depth she intended to reach, and they weren't chumming the water, just observing. But out here in the open blue, everything could change in seconds. Descending alone beneath the surface, she passed the thermocline where the water turned cool and darker. Rays of light filtered in at slanted angles, illuminating drifting particles and the distant silhouettes of curious fish. At around 60 meters, she paused, leveled her buoyancy, and began her survey, noting water salinity, tracking minor fish movements, and scanning for larger predators. For 20 minutes, everything was routine. Then the water shifted. It was subtle at first, a quiet ripple in the rhythm of the deep. A shadow darted in from her left, then vanished just as quickly. Elena turned slowly, scanning with trained eyes. That's when she saw it. The mako came from below and behind, streaking upward at a sharp angle. It moved so fast she barely registered its form before it struck. The impact hit her lower leg with blinding pain. Jaws clamped briefly on her calf, shredding the neoprene of her wetsuit and sinking teeth into flesh. Blood clouded around her, a dark bloom in the blue. Elena recoiled, spinning as she kicked back and reached for her dive knife. The shark veered away, looping wide. It hadn't latched on long enough to sever muscle or break bone, but the damage was bad. She could feel hot pain throb with each heartbeat, and blood was pumping freely into the water. Still, she remained calm, decades of discipline taking over. Her eyes locked onto the predator as it turned again. The mako circled tightly now, drawn by the scent, posture angled in unmistakable aggression. Unlike reef sharks or blues, makos were relentless. They struck with blinding speed and returned again and again. Elena floated with her back to the rising sun, minimizing her silhouette. Her knife gripped tightly in one hand, she waited, poised for the next approach. It came fast, a blur of motion from the side. The shark shot in, turning at the last moment, testing her. She slashed wide as it passed, blade grazing its side. It flinched, peeled away, and disappeared into the gloom for a few seconds. Her breathing remained steady, though her vision narrowed slightly from the blood loss. The leg was still responsive, enough to kick with some strength, but she could feel her energy beginning to drain. She had to get to the surface, but turning her back meant opening herself to another strike. She hovered, watching the water carefully, and waited for the shark's next move. It came from below this time. A high-speed rush straight upward, its jaws opening wide. She twisted at the last second, knife arm extended, and drove the blade downward. The steel connected just in front of the gill, glancing off tough muscle. The impact startled it enough to divert its path. It vanished again into the murk. She didn't wait. Kicking with all the strength left in her good leg, she angled upward, knife still ready, spiraling slowly to keep eyes on her surroundings. Bubbles rose fast around her as she gained altitude through the water column. The pain in her calf worsened, sharp and deep, but she forced herself not to slow. 15 meters, then 10. Sunlight grew stronger, shapes above became clearer. The surface, the boat, and the crew scanning the water for any sign of her. Then one more pass. The mako returned for a final sweep, rushing from behind at an angle. She caught its movement in time to swing wide, knife blade extended in a defensive arc. This time it didn't strike. It peeled away just before contact, sensing her awareness, perhaps calculating the risk. It faded into the deep like a missile returned to its launch point, no longer sure the target was worth it. Elena broke the surface moments later, gasping for air as hands reached down to pull her aboard. Blood streaked the water around her, and her wetsuit hung in tatters from the knee down. Her calf throbbed with every movement, but she remained conscious, gripping the edge of the boat with white-knuckled strength. The crew acted fast. Pressure on the wound, fluids. Emergency beacon activated. A helicopter was dispatched from São Miguel within minutes, and Elena was airlifted to the nearest hospital. Stitches, antibiotics, and weeks of recovery followed. The bite had torn muscle and skin but had missed major arteries. The doctors called it a miracle. She called it a calculated risk that nearly tipped the wrong way. The footage from her chest rig showed the moment of attack, the blur of motion, the sudden chaos, and the glint of teeth in the blue. It became a stark teaching tool in dive safety briefings and marine biology courses, not for shock value, but for realism. Even with all precautions, the ocean remained wild, and its apex predators could strike without warning. Elena returned to the water months later, her leg healed but bearing a long scar. She carried the same knife, cleaned and sharpened, though she never wanted to use it again. The encounter hadn't broken her spirit, only deepened her understanding of the line between study and survival. The open ocean, with its silence and beauty, still called to her. But now, beneath every descent, she carried a memory of sudden pain, of speed and cold instinct beneath the waves, and the knowledge that sometimes all that separated a researcher from tragedy was seconds and a steady hand in the deep. Liam Grant had spent the last 5 years chasing long stretches of empty ocean, pushing his body farther than most swimmers ever dared. At 29, he had completed open water crossings in the Mediterranean, the English Channel, and even the icy waters near Alaska. But the Indian Ocean had always drawn him for a different reason. The vastness, the stillness, the danger. The Seychelles offered a challenge he couldn't resist, a multi-kilometer solo swim through warm, remote waters, supervised only by a pair of trailing support boats. That morning, the sun burned high and the ocean stretched endlessly and smoothly beneath a sky washed clean by last night's rains. Liam entered the water just after 10 a.m., his lean frame cutting through the glassy surface with ease. He focused on his breathing, his form, and the subtle rhythm between body and sea. The support boats kept a steady pace nearby, radioing back and forth, keeping watch for currents, fatigue, and sharks. Always sharks. At first, everything felt routine. He passed 1 nautical mile, then 2. His strokes were clean and his mind was sharp. The team handed him hydration packs and electrolyte gels during short floats, and he kept moving with methodical endurance. Fish darted beneath him, flashes of silver in the deep blue. Occasionally shadows passed far below, but none lingered. Then came the stillness, a strange quiet that seemed to hang over the water without warning. No breeze, no ripples, just sunlight piercing the surface in golden beams. Liam slowed his stroke for a moment, treading water while the boats adjusted their position. That was when it happened. From the depths beneath him, a shape rose fast. Liam felt it before he saw it, a sudden shift in pressure, a rush of water pushing upward. Then a sharp, slicing pain exploded in his right thigh. It was quick, not the deep, crushing bite of a full attack, but something else. A testing nibble, a sudden clamp of jaws that broke skin and muscle with surgical precision. The pain lit up his leg, white-hot and immediate, and blood began to cloud the water around him in slow, twisting ribbons. He thrashed without thinking, instinct taking over as his legs kicked and arms flailed, water flying in panicked bursts. Through the chaos, he caught a glimpse of the predator, sleek, powerful, and unmistakable. The broad, rounded fins and mottled coloring marked it clearly. An oceanic whitetip, a shark known as much for its curiosity as for its aggression. It hovered just below the surface now, circling, watching him with slow, deliberate turns. Liam's heart pounded as his body moved with erratic bursts, torn between staying calm and fleeing. The pain in his thigh pulsed in time with his heartbeat, and the water around him grew steadily redder. The shark made another slow pass, brushing within meters but not striking again. It moved like a shadow with intent, studying him. From the boats, someone had seen the splash, then the blood, and within seconds a lifeguard dove in while another crew member threw out a rescue line. Liam spotted the float and reached for it, but his limbs were weakening now, his motions growing slower with every passing second. The white tip remained near, watching from a short distance, drifting lazily like a predator not yet finished deciding. The lifeguard reached him and wrapped one arm around his torso, kicking hard toward the rope. Liam focused everything he had on staying still, resisting the urge to panic further. The swimmer's blood could easily trigger more interest from the shark, and the last thing he needed was to provoke another approach. Together, they reached the rescue float and were pulled quickly toward the nearest boat. As his body was hauled up over the side, the pain fully registered, a sickening mix of sharpness and heat. Blood dripped onto the deck from the torn leg, and the crew acted fast. Bandages, gauze. Pressure was applied while the boat roared toward shore. Liam clenched his teeth and kept breathing, sweat pouring from his face as the adrenaline began to wear off, and cold nausea crept in to replace it. The wound, though shallow compared to what could have happened, was still serious. Deep enough to expose muscle, with rows of clean punctures from the shark's teeth. The oceanic whitetip had struck like a test, a brief investigative bite common among its kind, known to sample prey before fully committing. But even that was enough to cause damage and leave Liam badly shaken. The doctors said he'd been lucky. The bite had missed arteries and tendons, and with proper care and stitches, he'd heal well. But the psychological impact hit harder than expected. He had trained his entire life to control his mind in the ocean, to manage fear, pace himself through exhaustion, and suppress panic. But that day, floating in a blood-clouded patch of deep water, face to face with an apex predator, the illusion of control had shattered. The swimming community reacted quickly. The footage from the boat, the analysis of the shark's behavior, and Liam's testimony spread across social media and sports news outlets. It wasn't the kind of encounter that made headlines for horror. There were no lost limbs or massive scars. But it sparked new discussions about swim safety, about the realities of marine predators, and about how quickly a routine open-water swim could turn into a fight for survival. Liam returned home weeks later, limping slightly but already back to light pool training. He said the encounter hadn't ended his passion, but it had changed his relationship with the sea. He now understood in the most visceral way that even in calm, sunlit waters, danger could strike without warning, and that no amount of planning could erase the risks that came with crossing the line between human and ocean. Still, he planned to swim again, because the ocean hadn't rejected him. It had reminded him that beneath the surface the rules were different, and that sometimes all it took was a single bite to remember just how small he really was out there.